And we remember what I told you for attestation for these usage guidelines. Terms of use is another word for it. I was telling you they exist now for attestation. They previously was installed as well in another Identity Manager version for requests. And new in 9.2 is the PDF feature. That means, as you see it on the right-hand side, you can display PDFs instead of clear text as well. Then we created a new approval procedure, this time not for attestation, this time for requests. And this is named OX, and that is owner of the object in any request parameter of the requested properties. And this is now a group of people, that means an application role or the members of an application role, which is specified in a request parameter. This is quite new. We had some other, of course, data structures where we had such approvers stored, but to put them into a request parameter gives the whole thing a little bit more flexibility again. The way how that very specific thing then gets assigned, that means the application role with the members that gets assigned is then assigned through the help of such a foreign key column. And as you easily can see, the name of the request parameters is given, of course, by the approval step. And the same happens to the name of the table columns refers to the application role. At the end, the whole thing is only possible if there are request properties assigned to that specific approval step. On the other hand side, we have two enhanced approval procedures. First of all, the product owner was enhanced. They determine now as well approvers given for assignment requests. And the same happens to the target system managers of the requested system entitlements. And as well in the request section, we are talking about some properties which are renamed from a language perspective. The same thing than before. Again, on the left-hand side, you see the technical value. That is what stands in the database. And on the right side, you see the new display name. For abort or wonder, you will see cancel. Add additional will be additional approvers and so on. Left side, right side is important. The middle column is for everything how it was in the old world. That means previous 9.2. Another minor enhancements is the overview of an application role that shows now, if necessary, if this application role is used somewhere as a fallback approval group. In these cases, in workflows, you will now see the fallback approvers, which will help you to understand which third group of people is responsible for something. Another minor enhancement in the IT shop section is that now error messages can be translated as well. Error messages stored typically in so-named VII files. There is an example here on the screen right side, QAR customizer custom VII. There are error messages, of course, stored, and you can now enter other languages as the default languages if you like to. You see an example direct below. There is, for the Netherlands, for example, a specific error message in Dutch. Therefore, you see the error number and then the Dutch text as well with parameters included. Again, minor enhancements. First of all, request overview. This displays the modern request properties that are used and their parameters. Remember, in the Identity Manager we talked about, we have two types of parameters, request parameters. The old parameters was always seen in overview forms in the past. Now the new parameters are shown as well. The peer group factor calculation was in the past not looking at, I like to say, resources which are multi-requestable, because for these resources it is hard to figure out if they are just assigned or not, because you can request them again and again and again. However, they are now as well considered in the analysis. And last but not least, again to the request overview, if you look now into the display of request properties, you will see, of course, both parameter types, the new and the old request parameter values, so that everywhere both parameters are shown. just talking about Azure Active Directory or Entra ID. Therefore, we have, of course, a connected system module. And if we look into that, I think one of the biggest changes there is the support of the role management that is implemented now in Entra ID. And the interesting thing there is there are 3 types. You will see that on the next slides as well. One type is free, the other need licenses. One license is needed for the RBAC functionality of the roles here, and the other one, that is the P1 license, by the way, and the other license is necessary for privileged identity management, PIM. Therefore, you need a P2 license. And to make that pretty clear, people with P2 license does have P1 integrated, and the same for free, that is integrated into, of course, P1. So let's look into that. You see here as well on the slide, there is as well something that is called patch ID. What that is, for all the people who don't know that, these are patches on synchronization projects. So if you see such a number, VPR 35513, that means if I open my synchronization project just for Entra ID in Identity Manager, Synchronization Editor, and I apply that specific patch, then I get the specific functionality. And typically, this is absolutely enough. So if I have inserted that patch, then the functionality latest is implemented. You can, of course, as well add patches automatically in such projects. In this very specific case, it is a complete manually thing to activate these new role-based features here and that privileged identity management module stuff. You need some manually action steps. This is necessary. Secondly, and that is what you can see then under the orange header here, secondly, it is important to know that there are limits in the complete functionality of that function. That is not because one identity or the identity manager developers did a bad job just implementing stuff. The problem here is the Microsoft Graph API, which not supports everything from that new feature. But be sure with one of the next versions, we will as well improve that again, depending on what happens in the Graph API. Now let's look into it. If I get the free license, that means I don't have P1 or P2. I just have the free license. I get basic functionality. That basic functionality, as you easily can see, includes, of course, integrated roles. They can be used unrestricted. There is no problem. These integrated roles can then be assigned or removed to the individual users, as that is typically for roles. And yes, of course, integrated roles does have predefined role definitions. And creating of groups is as well possible. For a lot of other features, this is what you can see under the header of important. For a lot of other features, you need then, of course, licenses. So directory roles, as you can see, must be maintained via the Microsoft Azure portal. That means these directory roles can only be maintained there. On the other hand side, for the maintenance of directory roles in the Identity Manager, you need P1 or P2 as a license type in Entra ID. And the same for use of custom roles and the same of assigning roles to groups. That is all stuff where you need more licenses. So let's have a look into that. First of all, the role-based access control, as well known as Entra ID Premium P1 license feature. If you have this license just assigned, then you can additionally to what you can do with the basic functionality, you can access to the role definitions and role assignments. You can assign these roles to the entire group. Additionally to that, 2 types of partial scopes can at the end be supported. There is one hand side the directory object limitation, and the other is the restricting of custom elements of service. However, these both exist in Entra ID, and role assignments can be limited to the special objects, as you can see it for the first option, such as restricted applications, for example, or Entra ID users, Entra ID directories. This is possible there. Restricting elements of defined administrative units is as well possible. Last but not least, the other option, restricting custom elements of a service. Here, the custom roles can be created in the Identity Manager and they can be maintained, they can be handled only through synchronization. And as you easily can see, the premium P1 license at the end does not allow the Entra ID PIM stuff. Therefore, you need the P2 license. Here we are. The P2 license covers everything. That means RBAC plus PIM. That is what I mentioned before. As additional features to everything we have discussed, you get restrict and control of role assignments. You can have configurations of role policies such as time limits, for example, possible for both assignment types, and you can create the attestation for roles. With that, licenses, which you need, of course, in Entra ID, you get as well the features in the Identity Manager available. Yeah? Therefore, that have to be configured. I will show you that in a second where that happens as well. So we have two assignments types here for that PIM stuff available. There are active role assignments. That means a principal is just assigned a role. And we have these assignments of eligibilities. In this case, a principal has no active role assignment available, but can enable a temporary role assignment if required. So if we then look into that, I talked about manual steps to get the whole thing activated. The first manual steps are just in the synchronization project. You see on the left and on the right hand side the same synchronization project. The difference between the RBAC feature and the PIM feature is in activating these synchronization workflows. Yeah, you see the same picture left and right. But you see, of course, in the right picture, especially here, that in this very specific case here, 3 more of these workflows are activated in difference to the RBAC feature where the previous one was activated. What you have to do, of course, is you leave the first one that is activated, you just deactivate for PIM the second one, and then you activate the other 3. This at the end will then lead to the configuration for PIM. Yeah, from a functional perspective, PIM covers RBAC. From an identity manager synchronization project, you need different workflows, as you can see there. So this last thing that is manually to be done is that, of course, on the Entra ID organization, that is something that is stored in Identity Manager. In table AAD organization, there is a flag role behavior, which is a field. You can see that again on the right-hand side in the picture. And there are a drop-down available. There is a list of values available, and this list of values covers at the end the basic, the RBAC feature, or of course the PIM feature. And this needs to be configured on that organization so that the Identity Manager know which type of license is, of course, available. It is not possible to get that out of Entra ID today, maybe tomorrow. Currently, you have to set that manually. Unfortunately, and this is what you see here, if you look at that specific picture, you need to do it in the object browser because currently there is, of course, no option in the manager so available. What's a little bit behind that? I think the developers here are thinking that with one of the next Graph API changes, it is possible to get that information, this license information for P1 or P2 out of the Entra ID, and then it could be during the synchronization set automatically. And in the meantime, the object browser should do the job. If this is not possible, I'm very sure another front end will get as well an option to configure. So then let's look how it looks in the manager. You can directly see that here. And if you look into the web, it looks a little bit different, of course, because, I like to say the manager is more for data admins and the web is more for end users. But as you easily can see, the information about these roles are nicely to see. If we then look into, of course, the complete schema extensions, it's not really wondering us that beside the role behavior flag on the AAD organization, what I talked about seconds before, there are many, and I say many new tables created just to ensure that that complete role and PIM feature was implemented. If we then just look into additional properties for Entra ID users, this is then not a feature of these roles. Then you can see there is a little bit of change on the AAD user. We see here something like the employee hire date, the employee leave date time, employee type, and such. There is as well the cost center and the division. This is stuff which is new more or less in Entra ID or new in the API, and it is now as well part of the identity manager. Therefore, as you easily can see, exists another patch to get that inserted. One last feature which is important, especially with behavior-driven governance, is of course the last login information to figure out if user accounts or user accounts in permissions are used. We talked about that a little bit earlier, just talking about our web stuff. Here you can now see in the AAD user the fields. Of course, there's a last non-interactive sign-in date time. There's as well a sign-in date time. What's the difference? The one thing is just the time when last time somebody was signed in, and in the Entra ID, it is as well possible to, I like to say, figure out if somebody is only logged in or it is active. Because of that exist here two date time values, of course, together always with the request ID. However, both informations, that means both sets of informations, are used from the identity manager, and the maximum of this information is then inserted in the UNS account last logon field, where the identity manager takes the information from. To make it happen, all of these last login information features are typically a part of GDPR and whatever else user tracking. Therefore, you need specific permissions. As you easily can see in Entra ID, you need the audit log read all permission to make it happen. That means the identity manager needs the permission with its service. And last but not least, to see all of that, a new tab was just inserted into the main data form in the manager, which is the audit tab. And again, the typical hint, all of that works only if P1 or P2 as license type is of course available. So from a role perspective, there are new identity manager application roles available. There are new owner roles for administrative units, for applications and service principals available. You can see here the specific fields on the specific data objects where these elements are stored in available. It's always a UID to AE role owner. And with that, we have new owner groups. So we have new owner roles, which contains then the owners. Two more features. One, of course, to the service principals. As you easily can see, service principals can now be assigned as owners of a service principal. That was not possible in the identity manager before. Now it is possible, of course. And exactly therefore, remember on the discussion on new approval procedures we had in attestation, exists now that SP, approval procedure, owner of service principal, which now can be used to get this group of people in charge. Last but not least, talking about Entra ID, we had a little bit of connector change here. This time it is really the connector. In the past, we used a previous Microsoft Graph version. With all of these new features around roles, it was necessary to upgrade the Microsoft Graph.net SDK version we used to version 5.x, because without that, we are not able to do it. And that is now our default Microsoft Graph.net SDK version. Second feature on the connector side is that we now support as well the usage of connection certificates. That was not possible before. Now it is possible, and that helps at the end to log in to Entra ID. The requirements you can see there, and of course you need another patch to make it happen. And the last change on the connector side, this is a little bit an interesting thing. So we at the end started to ignore Entra ID extension property values with invalid data types. Typically, you should better not do that. You will get error messages, but these error messages are, I like to say, not really nice if you see them, for example, in the synchronization editor target system browser. So what was implemented there in our API? We just implemented that if there are such contraindicated values available, then we return null instead of raising the error. And of course, we are able to write a warning, and we do that in our nlog. The whole thing, again, is mainly implemented so that people can use our target's system editor. This is the button in the synchronization project, just to use the API of the identity manager to look into, in this case, Azure Active Directory. And there was some error messages, of course, always if there was some multi-value properties extensions here, not really nicely with data filled. And to avoid that, this specific change was made. From Entra ID directly to Microsoft Exchange Online. If we look into that, then the first thing what we do is we are just supporting the hierarchical address book. This is something really new, and of course Identity Manager now it's taking care on that. As you easily can see, to do so it was necessary to add a lot of new columns into known tables like the Entra ID organization, AED organization, same thing like the O3 EDL table and the O3E mailbox table. There are now new properties and links there. And with that, you get this hierarchical address book implemented. Again, another patch is necessary to support that, which is 35780. There were some connector enhancements for Exchange Online as well. First thing was we needed to upgrade our connector to use Exchange Online PowerShell module version 3.2.0 or later. This is of course something we did in our connector, but for you it's to know that this is now the PowerShell module we use. Additionally, we implemented the ability just to remove distribution lists. This is possible if a synchronization user is not in a distribution list configured as a manager. If this is not the case, then the distribution list gets removed. Last but not least, with the change to PowerShell module 3.2.0 and I like to say the extensive use of the graph API as well in Exchange Online synchronizations, it was necessary to allow more connection to the target system. Therefore, the number of these maximum simultaneously connections was just increased to 999. I'm not quite sure what it was before, but a lot lower. However, this is necessary because of the Graph API calls, and now it is possible to do so. That will speed up, I like to say, synchronizations a lot. And now let's talk about the connected system modules for Microsoft Teams. And if we look into Teams, the first thing what we can see is that the Teams templates are now supported. This is a little bit more to talk about, especially because you can't read out Microsoft Teams templates from Microsoft Teams. This is not possible because of the Graph API, which not allow that. And that is the reason why the Identity Manager ships just and only the standard templates which exist in Microsoft Teams. So you can configure the templates in Identity Manager. You can only see the standard templates there to configure. The reason for is that we can't read them out. Nevertheless, it is possible to add custom templates as well. Therefore, of course, you need in Teams, this is a screenshot you can see on the right side, to figure out the template ID from a custom template. Then you can enter that custom template in the Identity Manager using that template ID. And with that, your custom templates will live in the Identity Manager as well. little bit manually action necessary. If we look on some minor changes for Microsoft Teams, the first thing is that we support now additional member setting allow create private channels. This is something that was not possible before. Now it can be done. Secondly, in the Identity Manager, properties on archived teams are now locked. Yeah, that is at the end referring to Microsoft Teams itself. In Microsoft Teams, you can't do anything with archived teams, and so the Identity Manager now takes care of this behavior as well. Last but not least, a couple of performance improvements just during the synchronization for teams and channels. This will at the end help to get Teams data faster synchronized with the Identity Manager. Now let's talk about non-cloud systems. The first and of course famous one is here the Microsoft Active Directory. If we look into Microsoft Active Directory, I like to say the big change this time is just to support POSIX extensions. That means Unix properties or properties used just to allow to connect Active Directory with Unix accounts. Therefore, on the ADS account, as you easily can see, exists a number of new columns. One, of course, exists as well on ADS Group, as you easily can see, and on the contact. If you want to support these POSIX extensions in your Active Directory, it is necessary to insert at the end 2 patches. One just to make it happen with the Identity Manager, and one in addition if you want to use the whole thing together with active roles. And of course, for your local Active Directory, we support now with our connector Active Roles version 8.1.3. Now let's talk about Exchange on-prem in the same time like hybrid Exchange. There, first of all, we support as well the hierarchical address book. You can see it on the left-hand side. Couple of new columns make it possible. A new table was necessary as well, exists there as well. And again, another patch which needs to be inserted into that Exchange synchronization project. For the hybrid world, that means Exchange Hybrid Module, you need as well 2 new columns. They exist on the right-hand side here as well. Additionally, for our Exchange on-prem, we support now send as permissions for Microsoft Exchange Mailbox enabled distribution groups. Easily to see, a new table was created, EX0DL send as perm. And of course, another patch is necessary to make it happen. And last but not least, the connector supports now as well the access to additional properties at the Exchange mailbox. You can see the properties on the right-hand side of that slide. One thing to know, a standard synchronization project don't support these properties. You have to edit that synchronization project and add the properties manually. And now let's talk about the connected as system module for SAP. First of all, SAP.NET connector version 3.1 for x64-bit. It's now to be used. So as you easily can see, we need a version 3.1.2.0 or upper. And additionally to that, we need a .NET Framework 4.8. so that we can do the sub-synchronization. So we added a synchronization template for the BI analysis authorizations, of course, in SAP. But to use that, of course, it is only available if the SAP Business Warehouse component is installed in your SAP R3 system. And then on the left-hand side of our specific slide here, list of SAP users contain the user type property to enable faster filtering with objects. We don't do anything with that UST type property, but we just read it out of SAP so that it could be used for that purpose in the Identity Manager, that filtering purpose. And another feature which is implemented now is that it is possible only to synchronize active memberships. Yeah, you can just have active and inactive memberships in single roles or in composite roles in SAP. And that feature allows only to synchronize that. There is a small column change that exists in Unified Namespace in Identity Manager. In the past, for SAP roles, descriptions was just stored in a column description. Yeah, there was just in the table SAP role, there was a column descriptions, and there these specific descriptions was stored. This is now changed to SAP role description. That is a renaming of a column if you like to do so, but it fits better to SAP. And now let's talk about the connected system module of LDAP. If we look into that, we support, and that is new, an auxiliary class that is called EDU person. What is the reason behind that? We have a lot of customers which are just from a university level or from a school level, and they are using in their LDAP very often that auxiliary class is EDU person. We have not supported that in the past. Now we are doing that. This allows at the end to work with these default attributes for that auxiliary class. You can see them here on the screen, a lot of them. And of course, to show them at the end up, for example, in the manager, a new form was just generated in the main data sheet, a new tab that shows all of these classes. Again, like before, in an existing LDAP synchronization project, this auxiliary class attributes will not be mapped automatically. If you need them, then you need to map them directly in the synchronization project to that position where you want to have it. And now let's talk about the connected system module for Unix or Linux. If we do so, here the big change, and I think Marcus was showing that in the last Unite, is that we are now supporting a new time zone value for Unix-based systems. This time zone value is necessary, especially if you want to synchronize last login dates or something so that you get correct time values. Therefore, exists here, as you easily can see, a new column on the Unix host, which is UID dialog time zone, a value, by the way, that have to be configured manually. And if this is done, then all the templates behind these datetime values can start calculating the correct time. This is then as well used, as you easily can see here, in the information of the last login for Unix. Again, a feature where Marcus and Stefan Hausmann was talking about during the last Unite in a deep dive. However, here you can see it. There's the last login information and the password last changed information, all properties necessary for behavior-driven governance features, of course. Here you can see the last login date time in the same way then the last login string and the last password change time, which are all values which are then available here. The synchronization will read the string, of course, what stands in Unix. There's a specific format which is a little bit very specific to Linux systems. And our value templates will then doing the translation from that specific string into datetime values our database can understand. Very interesting here is these strings or the implementation of these specific information came from Linux as Linux distribution dependent. That means we're supporting the standard Linux distributions like Red Hat and Ubuntu and whatever. But if you support or if you use a Unix or a Linux version, which at the end does have its own way to do it, you have not to change the connector or something complicated. You have just to go into the value template and add one system more with a specific algorithm that helps to convert from that Unix string to our datetime values. Now let's talk about the connected system module privileged account governance. PAG. What is that exactly? Privileged account governance is the joint venture between PAM, that means privileged access management, and IGA. In our case, this is pretty often Identity Manager as IGA tool and Safeguard as the PEM tool. If we look at that, there are some extensions as well. We start with the version. As you easily can see, we support now one identity safeguard version 7.2 and not on the slide, of course, 7.3. Important there is to know between 7.2 and 7.3 from an identity manager perspective don't exist any differences. But to know is as well that 7.2 and 7.3 are also supported with the following new features. And this is now the content of the slide. If you look into that, we have on the one hand side an enhanced synchronization project. This enhanced synchronization project now allows to access API keys. Therefore, some properties was necessary and a new service item was necessary. All of that exists in the meantime. We also support TOTP codes for password requests as well. Therefore, a column was added to the system, what you can see on the left-hand side. Last but not least, right-hand side of the slide, we support partitions. To do so, the tables and properties was added, and you can find this information there. Again, we talked many times about it. Behavior-driven governance is at the end the ability in the IGA tool just to figure out accounts and accounts in permissions which are not used. And to make it happen, at the end, we get the information out of basically two systems. One, of course, is Safeguard and the other one is OneLogin. Both are here on the screen. For BDG now from Safeguard, we get information out of the table PAG outed log, and for OneLogin, of course, we get the same information as well. Again, BDG or behavior-driven governance, we talked about it during the attestation part of the web portal. There is now the feature that allows at the end to identify these non-used accounts and users in groups. Therefore exists, as you easily can see, a configuration parameter where that threshold, that means how many days is an unused account is configured. Nothing very new there. And in both cases, that means unused users and unused users in their permissions. You will as well use the same configuration parameter. Together with all the behavior-driven governance, we have, of course, implemented some new company policies. You can see them on the left-hand side. This is out-of-the-box functionality. Things like all PEM access options are used by user, or all PEM directory accounts are used, or something else, are now out-of-the-box companies, which helps to manage everything around behavior-driven governance. On the right-hand side of that same slide, you see then a very specific company policy. All PEM users groups are used by user. And this is important, especially because here it's an automatically removal of memberships part of the story. Out of the box, it is just configured in a way of that if a negative falls out of that policy, that means a violation, then automatically the memberships gets removed. And we continue with behavior-driven governance, this time attestation enhancements. As you easily can see, and I think we talked about it before, there is now the attestation policy enhanced in a way of that you can find all of these usage information so that decision makers can have a look at that, and the audit log will be displayed, all of that. A new attestation procedure was created, and of course, together with the new attestation procedure, you can see them here, PAM user group membership attestation, exists of course an attestation policy that is using this attestation procedure, and that attestation policy is unused PAM user group membership attestation. We continue again with behavior-driven governance. That is information we have seen as well in the business section of that training. We talked about the different types of conditions used to identify accounts which are not used. We talked about the doublet that always exists between a user that is not used and on the other hand side an account in a membership which is not used. You might remember that, and we talked as well about that there are then two ways to do it. One way is to just configure a fixed amount of days that leads then to an unused status, and the other one was then the threshold. Last but not least, additional attestation enhancements feature. As you easily can see, additional attestation conditions was created. These conditions could now be used, and they help filtering partitions, asset groups, and account groups. Now we talk about the connected system module OneLogin. And easily to see, first of all, OneLogin roles can now be automatically added to the IT shop. Therefore exists a configuration parameter, QER IT shop auto publish OLG role, and this parameter controls then the behavior. The next thing is a little bit more to explain. If you look into the identity manager on wherever you like to, then a disabled account is typically one flag. And that flag is something like account disabled, as you can see it here. This meets not completely what OneLogin is doing, because in OneLogin there are more than one just different conditions which can be true to make a user disabled. However, in the Identity Manager, an artificial property was implemented, and that artificial property now collects, with a value template, I guess, just the different OneLogin disabled status informations together and controls the flag, which is implemented on OLG user account disabled, so that it is handled like everywhere in the Identity Manager. Important to know here is this is an artificial property. That means the flag OLG user account disabled did not exist in OneLogin. The way around is then a little bit more complex. Last thing on that slide, it's a fallback solution for OneLogin user revision counter calculation. You know, revision counters are typically, flags are used to speed up the configuration. A revision counter typically says if a revision counter was not changed between the last sync and the new sync, then there is no change on the object, and because of that you have not to handle the object, and that speeds up the synchronization. In OneLogin, per default, the revision counter for the calculation which is used is at the end the date of the last event in OneLogin. And sometimes it is not really easy to get that information, or it takes too long, and because of that a fallback was implemented. And that fallback, and in this case, if to get the information takes too long, that means we are running into a timeout, then the current timestamp is used in difference, and typically the property or the object gets handled. Let's talk about, of course, Domino. You might have known it as Lotus Notes Domino in the past. If we look into that, then the only new implemented here is support for roaming users. You see, to make it happen that these roaming users get supported, some more columns was necessary in the NDO user table. And again, if you want to use roaming users in Domino, then you have to insert the patch, which is outlined here, 36087. And then some connector changes. We are now moving away from the connected system modules. We are just looking at connectors. If we do so, the first thing here is our SCIM connector. And in the SCIM connector, especially for SAP Cloud ALM applications via SAP Cloud Identity Services, we have inserted a new support for that. You can easily see that. With that along, there is a new template that allows at the end to define the mapping. And with all of that, no customization is necessary for that type of thing. In the meantime, you can have out-of-the-box support, which is quite nice. Additionally to that, second thing on the slide, support for custom headers exists as well, and that is as well seen or used in SAP. The whole thing is implemented into the SCIM connector, but I like to say the examples are here SAP. So again, SCIM connector, two more changes. The first one, user configurable page size. You might have seen that maybe together with ServiceNow or something else. It is sometimes necessary just to configure the amount or the the size of the page size by paging a lot of objects. In the past, that was, I like to say, hard-coded. Now, as you easily can see, it is valuable to be configured on the synchronization project. Second feature, support for rate limiting. This is just implementing an RFC. That RFC is 6585. And you can in the maximum configure 30 retries. Let's look at the CSV connector. The CSV connector is a very old connector, of course. CSV files is not really witch work. That is something we have seen many times in our life. However, that connector was upgraded in a way that now relative and absolute paths for the CSV project are supported. What is behind that? Behind that is the wish of some of our customers. They say it is not nice to them to have the project together with the CSV files in one file location. That means in one directory. They want to have them in separate directories. This was not possible before. Now it is. And with that change now, of course, you can separate these source files from the project file. And for the PowerShell connector, there's a feature really, I like to say, hard to explain. It goes a little bit back to what the PowerShell connector is doing. There are XML files used in the PowerShell connector, and we are working there with lists, or all the connectors are getting lists. And these lists can get properties back, but if these properties are at the end not transmitted or at the end not handled, then it could be that single objects are not showing the same properties if they are born out of the list object. And the main problem here is that sometimes leads to error situations. And what happens is that that a new consistency check was implemented in the consistency check section. And this is now testing these XML files used in the PowerShell connector. And if there are such unhandled, I like to say, properties in a list which are not used in single objects, then you will, and that is what you see on the right-hand side in the sample, you will get them outlined in the consistency check, and then you can fix your PowerShell XML. And one small change as well on the Identity Manager connector. Remember, in the synchronization editor, each synchronization project always is built out of two connectors. One connector is representing the target system. The other connector is representing the Identity Manager. This is the Identity Manager connector which is used. And here exists a new change regarding some language things as well. And that change is the connector typically delivers data out of the Identity Manager. And in case of limited values or bit masks, typically you get the values, but and you can as well get the display. But unfortunately, in the past, it was not possible to get translations of that specific display values. This is now possible as well. But if you are interested to use that, then please look at the limits. The limit is that this is only possible if the Identity Manager connector is directly connecting the database. It is not possible if a REST service, that means the app server, is in between the database and the connector.